Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku unlocked a quirk stronger than his dreams. Here is short summary. Ha. You say you will fight until you stop all the evil. Eradicate it from the world. Save everyone. Be the greatest. Answer me something then, Midoriya. Did you make your quirk this strong because you decided to become a hero? Or did you become a hero because your quirk is so strong? In a world ruled by quirks, filled with heroes and villains, a boy with the dream of saving everyone stumbles at the beginning of his life but later is elevated by a power that has the potential to be the greatest of all. People always say that talent without perseverance is useless, but no one mentions which is more important, talent or perseverance. Izuku Midoriya will have to figure that out, even if it means losing himself in the process. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. A green-haired boy jolted awake from a nightmare, a constant reminder of the harsh realities he faces every day since that fateful moment when he was labeled quirkless, useless, weak. This boy is Izuku Midoriya. At just 8 years old, he's already had to face the beat truth of how unfair and cold the world can be, how your future is decided by the circumstances of your birth, no matter how big your dreams are. Izuku's perseverance and determination had always been remarkable, and his goals nothing short of noble. What drove him was his deep desire to become a hero, someone who could save everyone, someone as dependable as All Might. But over the years, the boy who was once full of energy and optimism had turned into a shadow of his former self, overlooked and dismissed by society. People branded him a dreamer, unrealistic from a young age, and slowly, the bright flame of his spirit was dimmed. Izuku got out of bed, lost in thought, as he often had been since his mother pulled him out of school and decided he would be homeschooled through online classes. "You'll be safe here, my baby. No one will be able to hurt you here," his mother had said. But wasn't that just sad? Izuku couldn't tell what was worse. The constant bullying he had endured at school, or the way people treated him now, like he was made of glass, fragile and about to break at any moment. Either way, people no longer saw him as a normal person, they saw him as some kind of freak, defective, a Deku. No, none of that is the worst, Izuku thought, frowning. The worst part, in his mind, was that his own mother had given up on him and his dreams. The person he loved and trusted most had decided that he was a lost cause, constantly apologizing for him. He could see it in her tired eyes, the regret, the sadness for how things had turned out. But that wasn't what Izuku needed. The point of leaving school was to avoid those pitying looks, but if even his mother treated him that way, what was the point? Resigned, Izuku shuffled out of his room for breakfast. He'd grabbed some cereal since his mom was on the morning shift at the hospital and wasn't home. He'd take advantage of the time to watch hero videos on TV and work on his secret analysis of hero abilities and techniques in his notebooks. As expected from All Might, he prioritized evacuating the civilians while engaging the villain. By the time his monologue was over, there were no hostages left to harm, Izuku muttered to himself, smiling as he scribbled notes into his notebook labeled Hero Tactics No. 2. "I wonder if I could replicate some of those moves, at least on a smaller scale," he added with a shaky smile. He could feel the familiar sting in his eyes, signaling that tears were coming. "No, I won't cry. I can't keep crying over every little thing. A hero has to be strong, even mentally," he told himself, trying to keep his emotions in check. But the sting didn't stop. In fact, it grew worse. It wasn't just irritation anymore. "Damn it, maybe I watched too many videos today," he muttered, rubbing his eyes. With a click, he turned off the TV and blinked rapidly as he got up. He should have been checking if he had any assignments or lessons pending from his online classes, but honestly, he just wasn't in the mood to do anything school-related. In fact, he didn't even want to look at any screens with how strange his eyes felt. "I wish I could go to the park for a while," he sighed wistfully. But he knew his mom wouldn't let him out without supervision. He'd have to wait for her to get back from work. Still, the day looked so nice, and there was nothing to do inside. What if I just go out for a little while? Just a quick lap or two. I'd be back long before Mom gets home, he thought, feeling unusually bold. Nervously biting his lip, Izuku, normally the obedient son, decided that his desire to go outside was stronger than his usual need to follow his mother's rules. He glanced back briefly before stepping out the door. Then, with a smile, he made his way outside. Izuku watched as a couple of kids his age ran around, laughing under the watchful eyes of their parents. Ouch! One of the boys cried out. Sweetie, what happened? Are you okay? His concerned mother asked as she hurried over. Relax, Mom, it's just a small scrape, the boy replied confidently. He's right, honey, our little champ is tough. He'll be back to playing in no time, the father added with a grin. I know, our boy is so strong, the mother said, smiling. Izuku's face twisted as he watched the scene unfold. The boy hadn't done anything special, nothing to do with quirks, yet there his parents were, praising him and smiling. I could get up after scraping my knee too, Izuku muttered bitterly under his breath. Shaking his head, he tried to clear his thoughts. It wasn't worth ruining such a beautiful day with feelings like that. He even admitted to himself that he was more irritable than usual. If only I didn't have this damn pain in my eyes, he thought, his frustration growing. Now annoyed and tired, he stopped walking and rubbed his eyes. The pain wasn't going away, and now it was starting to give him a headachy and uncomfortable throbbing, accompanied by a strange warmth. He blinked rapidly as he started walking again. Maybe going outside wasn't such a great idea, he grumbled. Watch out! Izuku looked up just in time to see a ball flying toward him. Instinctively, he ducked to the side, avoiding it. But something didn't make sense. The ball had seemed to dodge his head, from behind. What? Izuku whispered. The pain in his eyes flared up again, sharper this time. Whoa, dude, how did you dodge a ball coming from behind? The boy who owned the ball asked, amazed. From behind, but I saw it coming from the front, Izuku thought, his eyes widening. He began stumbling backward, his head feeling strange, his breathing becoming shallow as he realized something. He could see everything around him, in every direction. Even though his eyes were looking straight ahead, he could clearly see what was happening behind him, to the sides, above, and below. His brain was processing a full 360-degree scan of his surroundings. For an average human, the field of vision spans about 130 degrees clearly, with an additional 50 degrees of unclear peripheral vision. But at that moment, the young brain of Izuku Midoriya was handling a perfectly clear 360-degree view in both the horizontal and vertical planes. And the only thing he felt was panic. What the hell is happening? Izuku screamed in terror. Whoa, dude, are you okay? What's going on? The boy asked, concerned. Ignoring the boy, Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, but his breathing grew more frantic as he noticed something else. He could still see. Even though his eyes were shut tight, he could still see. How was that even possible? Nothing made sense. Where was his mom? He was scared. He needed to get home, right now. Izuku started moving, but the disorientation overwhelmed him. How could he know which way to go when his field of vision had expanded by 180 degrees in both directions? He didn't know which way was forward, backward, left, or right. Completely lost, he spun around in confusion, seeing a crowd of people staring at him with frightened expressions. Some of them were moving their lips, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't hear or understand what they were saying. He heard faintly, amidst the ringing in his ears. Izuku tried to concentrate with all his might. The muffled sounds slowly began to clear up. Kid, get out of the way, a crowd of people screamed. IIIRFFRRFIFF. Under the horrified eyes of the onlookers, a truck that couldn't brake in time slammed into the small figure of Izuku Midoriya. No, he came out of nowhere. I swear, I couldn't stop in time, the terrified truck driver yelled as he jumped out of his cab. Around them, parents cried and clutched their children, while the front of the truck, bent and smoking, obscured the view of the boy's condition. What's going on here? A woman dressed entirely in purple asked as she arrived on the scene. She was a hero who had come after hearing the commotion. A child was hit by the truck, an elderly man explained, his face full of anguish. The hero's eyes widened as she looked at the front of the truck. I swear, I tried to stop, but it all happened so fast, I didn't mean to kill him, the driver repeated, now on his knees, visibly shaken. The important thing now is to call an ambulance. Everyone, clear the area immediately, the hero ordered with authority. The crowd began to move back to obey, but just then, the cloud of smoke started to clear. Some curious onlookers peeked through the gaps, trying to see what had become of the green-haired boy. What they saw left them speechless, including the hero. There, crouching with his arms wrapped around his head, was Izuku. Floating mere inches away from him were fragments of the truck's front, suspended in midair as if forming a protective barrier. But the most astonishing part was that Izuku was completely unharmed, not a single scratch on him. Tears streamed down his tightly shut eyes as he trembled in fear. He's okay. He's alive. Make room, the hero said, rushing toward Izuku. She tried to touch the trembling boy, but her hand couldn't reach him. Something was stopping her at the same distance as the floating debris. A barrier. But it stopped a truck. At his age, what kind of quirk does this boy have? The hero thought, amazed. Kid, listen to me. Everything's okay. Nothing bad happened. You can turn off your quirk now, she said in a calm and gentle voice. Izuku seemed to react slightly, lifting his head toward her. Sniff, sniff. Quirk. I don't have a quirk, was all Izuku managed to say, his nose running, before he collapsed unconscious. As soon as the boy hit the ground, the truck's debris fell neatly around him. Finally, the hero was able to approach and pick him up. The ambulance had arrived, and under the relieved eyes of the driver and the crowd, the small green-haired boy was rushed to the nearest hospital. Will he be okay, doctor? The nurse asked. Yes, of course. There's no physical damage, but scans of his brain show significant fatigue, likely from the use of his quirk. Have his parents been informed? The doctor responded. Yes, it took us a little while to get in touch with her, but his mother's contact information was on the label of his shirt. Smart. I'm sure the boy doesn't even know his clothes are tagged with that information. Mom. A weak, childlike voice called. Oh, you're finally awake, little one. Everything's okay. You're at Musutafu Regional Hospital. Your mom is on her way. I'm Dr. Senju, the doctor replied with a smile. Hospital? Izuku asked, a bit more alert now. That's right. You had a small accident, but everything's fine. You weren't hurt, and no one else was either. You just gave the man driving the truck quite the scare, the doctor explained. The man, driving the truck? Izuku echoed, confused. The doctor and the nurse exchanged quick glances. What's the last thing you remember, kiddo? The doctor asked gently. I remember that, Izuku trailed off, bringing his hands up to his eyes. Suddenly, the pristine white room around him, every corner and edge, materialized clearly in his mind. There wasn't a single spot he couldn't see. His head began to spin, and the monitor connected to him started beeping wildly. Easy now, everything's fine. Breathe with me, in and out, the doctor said, trying to calm him. Izuku tried to follow her instructions, and the frantic beeping slowed down, but the discomfort and confusion lingered. What's happening to me? Izuku asked, still keeping his eyes closed. We're going to figure that out. A nurse is bringing your medical records now. I think what's happening to you is related to your quirk. Could you tell me a bit about it? The doctor explained. My quirk? Izuku repeated, now even more bewildered. Before the doctor could answer, a woman with green hair burst into the room, wearing a uniform from another regional hospital. Izuku, she cried, rushing toward her son. My baby, what happened? Why did you leave the house alone? You know we had an agreement, she began to say rapidly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Izuku tried to answer his mother's barrage of questions, but once again, his eyes began to feel strange. At least the pain was gone, but now there was a persistent sense of discomfort. He shut his eyes tightly. Mrs. Midoriya, your son is fine. I'll explain what we know about the incident, but first, can you tell me what his quirk is exactly? the doctor asked. His quirk. Izuku doesn't have a quirk, his mother responded, her voice tinged with sorrow. The doctor raised an eyebrow immediately as Izuku's mother looked back at him. What's wrong, my baby? Why are you covering your eyes? What's happening? Her question stopped abruptly when Izuku lowered his hands and opened his eyes. His mother had expected to see some irritation or damage in his small green irises, but what she saw left her speechless. Izuku's eyes were now a brilliant sapphire blue, glowing so brightly they seemed to emit light. What's wrong, Mom? Izuku asked, confused. Your eyes, Inko whispered, stunned. The doctor, who had been observing their interaction, started to piece things together. Just then, the nurse entered with a folder, and without wasting any time, Dr. Senju reviewed the information. It was just as she had suspected. Izuku Midoriya, quirk. None, she read quietly. This is certainly interesting. Mrs. Midoriya, I can say with reasonable certainty that, despite being 4 years late, your son has finally awakened his quirk, the doctor explained, looking at the pair of shocked green-haired individuals. The discomfort and confusion were suddenly forgotten as Izuku's heart pounded in his chest. The small flame of hope inside him, which had slowly died over the years, suddenly reignited with fierce intensity. I have a quirk. Izuku trembled as he spoke. How is that possible? The doctor I took him to when he was 4 said the lack of a joint in his toe was clear evidence he didn't have a quirk, Inko exclaimed in disbelief. The joint in toe test is only a relatively new concept. Maybe in 3 generations, it will be a foolproof indicator, but in your son's generation, it's still just a test with a 75% accuracy rate in predicting quirks or the lack thereof, the doctor explained. Both Midoriyas were left speechless. So, what is his quirk? Inko asked, filled with uncertainty. That's what we're going to find out. Fortunately, my specialty is quirk research. To be honest, the fact that his power awakened so late suggests there's something unique about it. Izuku, I need you to be completely honest with me, okay? The doctor said seriously. Yes, I promise, Izuku responded. Good, let's start with what happened. The hero who brought you in said you were hit by a truck, but some kind of barrier stopped you from being hurt. Do you remember anything about that? The doctor asked. Inko went pale as she heard this, her hands trembling as she began frantically checking her son for any sign of injury. I don't really remember any of that. The only thing I recall is that my vision got weird, Izuku replied. The doctor began taking notes. All right, let's start there. What do you mean by weird? What happened? She asked, her interest piqued. When I left the house, my eyes started to hurt. It felt like a pain behind them. Now it's just uncomfortable, but I remember my head hurting, and then, I could see everything. I mean, I could see behind me, above, below, and to the side us all at once. That's why I got dizzy. I didn't know how to move. After that, everything became a blur, and when I woke up, I was here in the hospital, Izuku explained, trying to recall the details. So, you could see everything around you, the doctor looked up from her notebook. That would explain the headache and the discomfort in your eyes. The human brain isn't designed to process that much information at once. Also, if your quirk has only just awakened, it's likely your eyes underwent a sudden change. Judging by your mother's expression, I assume your eyes weren't always blue, she asked. Izuku was surprised to hear that his eyes had changed color. That's right, his eyes were like mine, Inko confirmed, still shocked. Now there, that color. Is this his quirk? She asked, puzzled. We're treading into uncharted territory. We could conclude that his quirk has something to do with his vision, but that wouldn't explain how he avoided getting hurt by the truck. In fact, the hero mentioned that the barrier surrounding him couldn't be surpassed, almost as if Izuku had become untouchable, the doctor said, deep in thought. Both Midoriyas listened intently. Mrs. Midoriya, what's your quirk? And what about your husband's? The doctor asked, curious. My husband's quirk is exhaling fire from his mouth, and mine is a very weak form of telekinesis. I can only pull small objects toward me, Inko said, embarrassed. Based on what you're describing, it's possible that Izuku's quirk falls into one of 2 categories. I have an idea, the doctor said with a smile after a moment of reflection. Mrs. Midoriya, I'd like you to use your quirk to pull this pen toward you. Izuku, watch carefully and tell me if you notice anything strange when your mother uses her power, the doctor suggested. Inko nodded and extended her hand toward the pen, using her weak telekinesis to slowly pull it toward her. Izuku, eyes wide open, carefully watched the process. Whoa, what is that? Izuku exclaimed in awe. Both his mother and the doctor looked at him curiously. Did you see something, Izuku? The doctor asked, intrigued. Yeah, some strange threads came out of Mom's hand. They were all messy and uncontrolled, but they sort of wrapped around the pen. Then, more threads came from the pen, and they connected back to Mom, like they were pulling it toward her, Izuku explained, fascinated. Inko looked confused, while the doctor smiled with excitement. Izuku, I know this might sound strange, but can you try to replicate what your mother just did? The doctor suggested. Izuku, filled with curiosity, nodded eagerly. He extended his hand toward the pen, and to his amazement, the same threads he had seen coming from his mother now appeared from his own hand. Instinctively, he tried to organize them. He could feel when they connected to the pen, and with all his concentration, he tugged on the threads with all his might. The pen shot into his hand, causing both his mother and the doctor to gasp in surprise. Excellent. That confirms it, the doctor said enthusiastically. What does this all mean? Inko asked, bewildered. Let me explain in simple terms. This is a very special case. When a child is born, their quirk typically falls into one of three main categories: mutated quirk, hybrid quirk, or inherited quirk, the doctor began explaining. Both Midoriyas nodded, listening intently. A mutated quirk happens when there's a genetic mutation, making the child's quirk completely different from their parents'. This type of quirk is the most unpredictable and can sometimes be dangerous to the child if their body isn't prepared for it. A hybrid quirk occurs when the quirks of both parents combine. For example, if Izuku had developed a hybrid quirk, he might have developed pyrokinesis, a mix between your telekinesis and your husband's fire-breathing ability. Finally, there's the inherited quirk, where the child inherits the quirk from one of their parents. This category has three variations. The quirk can be inherited identically, enhanced, or evolved. And this is where Izuku comes in. The doctor paused, glancing at Inko before continuing. Your power, Mrs. Midoriya, isn't just weak telekinesis as you've believed. It seems to be a very primitive control over a universal energy that you unconsciously draw toward yourself. Izuku didn't just inherit this ability, his quirk has evolved. He can not only control it better, but he can also see it, allowing him to manipulate it with much more precision. Both Midoriyas were stunned. Izuku was practically shaking with excitement. So, does that mean I can pull bigger things? Izuku asked with a huge smile. I suspect that's only the beginning. Your quirk has evolved significantly. You'll have to explore what else you can do with this energy that both you and your mother can manipulate. Your eyes seem to be the key to refining that control, the doctor responded. Izuku let out a small squeal of joy, the possibilities racing through his mind. But why did his quirk only awaken now? Inko asked, still in shock. That suggests that his quirk is extremely powerful. His body or DNA likely suppressed it until he met the minimum conditions to handle it. You mentioned your head hurt, Izuku. That was because of sensory overload from your advanced vision. If this power had awakened when you were 4, it could have caused serious brain damage, the doctor explained. Inko hugged her son tightly, tears streaming down her face. And clearly, your power isn't just about pulling things. Somehow, you managed to evade the impact of a truck. You'll need to explore your potential carefully, the doctor added, rummaging through a drawer. It seems like your quirk is permanently active, which means you'll need something to help you rest your mind and eyes. Don't worry, I have several pairs of glasses here for people with eye-related quirks. Try them on and tell me if they make a difference, the doctor suggested, handing him a variety of glasses. After trying on several pairs, Izuku found a pair of round, black glasses that provided him with immediate relief. His mind relaxed, and his vision returned to something closer to normal. With these, I can't see behind me or above and below anymore, but I can still see to the sides, Izuku commented. A carbon silicon alloy. Your field of vision has been reduced to 180 degrees. Can you still see the energy? The doctor asked. Izuku tried using his ability and noticed that while he could still perceive the energy, it was blurry now. I can see it, but it's not as clear, he replied. It seems that to use your quirk at its full potential, you'll need to remove the glasses. You'll have to train carefully to build up your brain's resistance and learn how to orient yourself with your full vision. With the glasses on, you'll still be able to use your power, but in a limited way, the doctor concluded. So what happens now, doctor? Inko asked, who had been silent for a while. We'll schedule monthly follow-ups to monitor your progress and see if we can improve the glasses. But for now, I want you to practice your quirk in moderation. Also, since your quirk has evolved, you'll need to think of a name for it and officially register it, the doctor said with a smile. Both Midoriyas nodded in agreement. The walk back to the apartment was quiet. Inko's expression was conflicted, while Izuku was practically buzzing with happiness, trying to see the energy even with his glasses on. Both Midoriyas entered their home, and the inevitable conversation began. Oh, Izuku, I'm so happy you've awakened your quirk, Inko said with relief. Yeah, Mom, it's amazing. I can't wait to see all the things I can do. I'm going to become the greatest hero, Izuku replied, smiling widely. You'll finally be able to make that dream come true. I'm so relieved. All these years of worry, and in the end, it was just because your quirk hadn't awakened yet, Inko said with a light laugh and a sigh. But Izuku suddenly stopped in his tracks. What do you mean? I always told you I'd be a hero, Izuku said quietly. Ignoring her son's words, Inko continued speaking out loud. Now you can finally go back to school. There'll be no more reasons for anyone to bully you. You'll be able to have a normal life again, she said. Behind the dark, round glasses, Izuku's eyes seemed to dim at his mother's words. Normal. So I was abnormal all along, he thought, feeling the weight of his worst fear creeping up on him. His mother had never truly believed in him. And now, this newfound faith she was showing, wasn't in him. She didn't see him as her son, she saw his quirk. Nothing has changed, it's the same as before. Before, she saw my lack of a quirk. Now, she only sees that I have one, Izuku reflected, conflict rising within him. Oh, and just wait until I tell Mitsuki. She'll be so surprised and relieved. Maybe we can visit them, and Katsuki will get to see your new power. We could even enroll you in his school, and you two could be friends again, but Inko was cut off by Izuku's sharp, cold voice. No, Izuku said firmly. Inko blinked, confused. What do you mean, baby? Don't you want to go back to school? His mother asked, visibly taken aback. How can you say that? Weren't you the one who always talked about Bakugo with disdain? Izuku responded, his voice full of bitterness. Inko's eyes widened in surprise. But baby, it was all just a misunderstanding. He was just a child. I'm sure if you talk things out, he'll apologize. I will never talk to Katsuki Bakugo if I can help it, Izuku shouted, his emotions overflowing. Inko recoiled, shocked by her son's tone. Now that my quirk has awakened, do you think we can just pretend the last 4 years didn't happen? You were the one who took me out of school. You're the one who planted the idea in my head that I was weak, Izuku said with frustration, tears welling up in his eyes. Izuku, I didn't. What's the matter, mother? Am I suddenly worth something now? Am I finally able to be a hero? Izuku spat bitterly, releasing all the pent-up emotions he had been holding in for years. Emotions that had surfaced when his mother apologized instead of supporting him when he needed it most. Inko began to cry, trying to reach out to her son. Izuku, I didn't. Wait, why are you calling me mother? Inko asked, her voice trembling. I don't need your support, mother. I survived 4 years without it. I can manage on my own, and you'll see, everyone will see, Izuku said coldly. Memories from the past began to resurface in Izuku's mind. You can't play with us. We'd get in trouble if you got hurt because you don't have a quirk. But I want to play. You should consider other options for your future. You need to be realistic, kid. But I can. I can do it. Are you planning to defend that kid? You can't do anything. You can't even defend yourself. You're weak, you're useless, you're a Deku. The memories surged with intensity, as if they had happened at that very moment. I'm not weak. I never was, Izuku said, tears in his eyes, staring at the ground. But now I'll show you. I'll show them, that not only am I not weak, I'll prove that I will be the strongest, Izuku said, looking directly at his mother before turning and heading to his room. Izuku Midoriya, unable to move, with her heart in pieces, would remember that day for a long time as the day she lost her son, and for one reason only, her own fault. Chapter text. The sun began to rise over the horizon, casting the first morning rays over the city of Musudafu. People were starting their daily routines, getting ready for work or school without a care. However, a specific percentage of the population, not only in the city but throughout the country, was gearing up for a particularly important day. We focus on an apartment complex in the same city. Inside one of the apartments, a teenager was tossing and turning beneath the covers. I'm up, mumbled the figure. A hand emerged from under the blankets, fumbling for the alarm clock on the nearby desk to silence it. The figure sat up, and with a strange flick of motion, the sheets seemed to slip off on their own. The teenager smiled faintly as he looked at his hand, which was making a slight gesture before heading to the bathroom. Izuku Midoriya, now almost 8 years after awakening his quirk, had gone through the typical growth spurts. Standing at 1.65 meters tall, his slim, almost lanky figure hid muscles that gave him agility. Other than that, not much about his appearance had changed except for 2 distinctive details, his eyes and his hair. PFF'd, Izuku spat after finishing brushing his teeth. In the mirror, his reflection stared back at him, bright blue eyes and completely white hair. Although it still kept its usual volume and messiness, the color had changed over time. The change in his hair wasn't sudden, like his eyes. During the first year after his quirk awakened, random white strands began to appear until, by his 12th medical checkup, the last trace of green that once defined him had completely disappeared. At first, the color change was a cause for concern. Dr. Senju suspected it was a side effect of the stress caused by his quirk, but after running several tests, they concluded it was a harmless genetic shift. For Izuku, the change wasn't a big deal. In fact, he felt like it symbolized the birth of a new version of himself. But for his mother, Inko, it was different. That small physical change made her feel like a part of what connected them had broken. And speaking of his mother, I'll be back later, Izuku said from the door, adjusting his usual black glasses. Hurried footsteps echoed in the apartment. Good luck, Izuku Midoriya called, but she didn't get finish her sentence before Izuku closed the door. Her face took on a sad expression, one that had unfortunately become common for her over the years. On the other side of the door, Izuku hadn't left yet. He stood still, staring at the ground, sighing after hearing his mother's goodbye. The relationship between the Midoriyas had never been the same. Izuku had once felt furious and devastated by his mother's reaction when he awakened his quirk. Inko, on the other hand, felt incredibly guilty, realizing her son had been suffering for years without her noticing and that she had played a part in that suffering. Over time, their emotions cooled, but neither had the courage to reopen that conversation. The years passed, and their interactions became brief and awkward. Izuku still loved his mother as much as he did when he was a child, but deep down, he couldn't help but feel disappointed, even betrayed. And being a teenager in the midst of puberty, he wasn't the best at managing his emotions. Enough, Izuku. You can deal with your family problems later. Now, you have to focus, like a hero. After all, today's the day, he thought, lifting his gaze and resuming his walk with determination toward his destination. Today, February 26th, was the day when everything would truly begin. Today was the entrance exam for UA High School. Izuku walked calmly through the streets of the city. He had already calculated how long it would take to reach the exam, so he wasn't in a rush. As he walked, his mind started to drift back over everything that had happened since his quirk had awakened. Izuku had dedicated all his effort to understanding his potential. He tried to manipulate the energy he could see with his enhanced vision, and although he made significant progress, he quickly realized that his power was incredibly difficult to control. It wasn't surprising that his mother could only attract small objects. Even that was impressive considering she couldn't actually see what she was doing. Controlling that energy required mastering countless variables to make anything work. Though he constantly practiced using his eyes without his glasses, it still caused him to tire quickly, so he couldn't fully rely on them yet. To compensate, he developed a method where he invented his movements or skills with his eyes exposed but practiced them with the glasses on, repeating the learned movements until he formed a kind of muscle memory, allowing him to control the energy without always having to use his vision. Complicated, right? Despite all his dedication, Izuku still felt a twinge of anxiety. His sharp mind had helped him develop useful techniques, but a part of him wondered if he had truly given it his all. However, there wasn't much he could do about it. After all, the law prohibited the use of quirks in public spaces, and his mother couldn't afford a training center. So, everything he practiced had to be done discreetly in forests or open areas of parks, limiting his ability to test his skills on a large scale. As a result, much of what he had learned remained mostly theoretical. "You've got to do your best, Midoriya, give it everything you've got," he repeated in his mind like a mantra. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden shout. "Watch out!" yelled a man who was on a ladder, painting the facade of a house. The reason for his shout was that a bucket of paint had fallen and was hurtling toward a mother and her daughter, who were walking by, unaware. Izuku reacted in an instant. He jumped with agility, and just before the paint reached them, the little girl managed to look up, seeing the massive amount of paint about to rain down on them. "Ah!" the girl screamed, closing her eyes as her mother instinctively shielded her. A few seconds passed, but the paint never touched them. The mother opened her eyes first, and what she saw left her stunned. The paint was splattered all over the ground, but around them was a perfect 2-meter circle that remained completely clean. Standing in the center of it was a young man with white hair. "What? How?" the mother stammered as the girl opened her eyes. "Don't worry, ma'am, everything's fine. I hope you don't mind that I used my quirk, but I thought it was better than a paint bath, don't you agree?" Izuku said with a smile. The mother stared at him for a moment, surprised, and then returned his smile gratefully. "It's no problem at all. I really appreciate you stepping in," the woman replied. "That was amazing," the girl exclaimed, looking at Izuku with wide eyes full of admiration. "It was nothing. Just make sure to keep it a secret. You know, it's illegal to use quirks without a hero license," Izuku said kindly. "With a quirk like that, are you planning to become a hero, kid?" asked the man who had come down from the ladder, visibly relieved that the mother and daughter hadn't been covered in paint. "That's the plan. But for now, I've got to go. I have my entrance exam today," Izuku replied as he waved energetically and resumed his walk, now at a slightly faster pace. "Good luck, and don't worry, I'll keep your secret," the little girl shouted excitedly, watching as Izuku walked away. Despite everything he'd been through, Izuku remained kind and considerate. He was still the same helpful and noble kid, or, well, almost the same. "I'm so nervous. I've trained so much for this moment." "Me too. What do you think the exam will be like?" "I heard the practical exam is the most important part. Don't underestimate the written part. Even though it doesn't affect your ranking, you still need to pass it to be considered." "I'll make it. Nothing's going to stop me. We'll be in the same class once we're admitted, I guarantee it." In front of the doors of the prestigious UA High School, those and many other conversations could be heard between the candidates. A crowd of young people from all over the country, not just Musudafu, had gathered. Thanks to advancements in transportation, even those living in remote areas could reach the academy in no more than an hour and a half. Excitement, nerves, and a hint of arrogance reflected in the faces of many candidates dreaming of becoming heroes. Only 5 minutes remained before the doors would open, allowing the young hopefuls to enter the academy. Among the crowd was Izuku, who smiled slightly while discreetly observing the other teenagers. His fascination with quirks and heroic tactics hadn't changed over the years, so he was trying to deduce the powers of the other candidates. It was easy when they showed physical mutations, but those with no noticeable traits opened up a world of possibilities. Of course, if he took off his glasses, he could detect those with emitter-type quirks, but that was a trick for later. Despite his confidence, Izuku felt a bit nervous. It had been years since he'd interacted significantly with people his age, and some of these young candidates would become his classmates. He said, would become, and not, might become, because, for him, failing the exam was not an option. He just hoped his future classmates would be better people than those he shared school with when he was younger. The last he'd heard about any of them was through the news, overhearing his mom talking with Mitsuki. I hope that villain gave that idiot Bakugo a good scare. It was probably his fault for being there in the first place, Izuku thought with a somewhat vengeful smile. All candidates, please enter the institution in an orderly manner. A few meters from the entrance, you will find automated staff. WHO will scan your applicant identification card and direct you to the correct auditorium for the written test. Further instructions will be given by the exam proctor, announced a voice through the speakers. Excited cheers erupted as the academy's massive doors opened, and the numerous teenagers began to stream inside. Documents? Asked a robotic voice. Izuku showed his applicant card, and a large yellow lens scanned the paper. Applicant number 3126. Name: Izuku Midoriya, Quirk, Limitless. Your auditorium is F. Proceed to the right. Izuku smiled when he heard the name he had given his quirk. To him, Limitless represented the idea that there were no boundaries to what he could achieve with the right training and enough imagination. He continued walking until he reached Auditorium F. The room was enormous, just as he had imagined. He found an empty seat, and as instructed when he filed his paperwork, he found a bag with the necessary supplies for the exam: a pencil, an eraser, and a pen with the UA logo on the top. At least 30 minutes passed before the exam started, under the supervision of someone Izuku recognized instantly, Present Mike. After 2 full hours, the time limit for completing the written exam, Present Mike stepped to the front of the auditorium and used his quirk to speak at his signature loud volume. Izuku had finished the exam early and decided to rest his head on the desk to clear his mind. He knew that the less mental fatigue he had, the more effectively he could use his quirk. Welcome, aspirants. Are you ready for the show? Present Mike shouted. Nobody in the auditorium responded. Izuku lifted his head slightly to listen better. Tough crowd. Anyway, now I'll explain how the practical exam will work, he continued enthusiastically. Present Mike began detailing the exam. They would be sent to different zones simulating a city, where they would have to defeat various types of robots. He explained that there were 3 types of robots, each worth a different number of points matching their number of presentation. The goal of the exam was to accumulate as many points as possible in just 10 minutes. So, it's a combat-focused test. That would put non-combat quirks at a disadvantage. But I guess that's not my problem, Izuku thought, concentrating. The only rule is that you can't attack other applicants. Any attempt will result in immediate disqualification. Aside from that, you're free to use your quirk to its fullest potential, Present Mike added with a grin. Suddenly, a teenager with blue hair and glasses raised his hand and spoke in a serious tone. Excuse me, why does the pamphlet mention 4 types of robots when you only described 3? A mistake like this is embarrassing for an institution like UA, which is supposed to train the best heroes. And you, with the white hair, he said, directing his attention to Izuku. Izuku fully raised his head and looked at him in surprise. Are you talking to me? He asked, tilting his head. Why were you sleeping? It's disrespectful to sleep at such an important moment. And why are you wearing sunglasses? Where is your school uniform? You're dishonoring your school by not wearing your uniform for the written part of the exam. If you're not going to take this seriously, you might as well leave now, the boy with blue hair said, visibly upset. Izuku's brow furrowed. What's this guy's problem? He thought irritably. First of all, I wasn't sleeping, I was resting my eyes to use my quirk at full capacity. That's why I wear these glasses. Secondly, nowhere did it say that wearing a school uniform for the exam was mandatory. Can't you read? And even if it were, I don't have a uniform because I was homeschooled. And third, why do you care what I do? It's none of your business, so why don't you just shut up and let them finish giving us the instructions? Izuku replied coldly. PFF'd. Wow, a short purple-haired girl with headphones whispered behind Izuku, trying to stifle a laugh. The boy with blue hair was completely stunned. He hadn't expected a response like that, but before he could reply, Present Mike intervened. You're allowed to wear whatever you want for both parts of the exam. And I was just about to explain the fourth type of robot. It doesn't give any points, it's more of an obstacle than a target. It will appear at a random moment during the test, explained the hero. I understand. I apologize for the interruption, the boy with blue hair said, bowing his head before quickly sitting down. All right, if there are no more questions, follow me to Section F. We're heading to the site of the practical exam, Present Mike announced, leading the candidates out of the auditorium. This place is massive, it looks like an entire city. And there are 5 other zones like this. How much money does this academy have? The candidates marveled at the vast area where the practical exam would take place. Everyone had changed into athletic gear to improve their mobility. Izuku was the only one who hadn't changed, as he had already shown up wearing a blue hoodie, black athletic shorts, and matching sneakers. Focus, Izuku, this is the moment. My mind is clear, and so are my eyes. I'll avoid taking off my glasses unless absolutely necessary to be able to use my quirk for as long as possible, he thought as he stretched and adjusted his glasses. TRUUUMMMM. The doors to the mock city burst open. Without hesitating for a second, Izuku dashed inside at full speed. The other candidates looked confused until Present Mike's voice boomed from a nearby tower. What are you waiting for? In the real world, there are no start signals. Go, 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 he shouted. Hearing that, the other candidates widened their eyes and rushed into the exam zone. Izuku had entered the simulated city with a considerable lead over the other applicants. His focus was on making the most of every second. As he rounded a corner, he heard the metallic clank of his first target approaching. Threat detected. Proceeding to eliminate, said a cold robotic voice as a combat machine advanced toward him. Izuku observed it calmly. The robot had a slim appearance, standing about 2 meters tall with multiple metal limbs equipped with rotating blades that sparked as they moved. The machine prepared to launch a massive attack, but Izuku was already ready. It's a 1-point robot. Perfect to start with, he thought as his right hand moved into a special position. He crossed his index and middle fingers while curling the other 3, activating a technique he had perfected through years of practice. The robot's claw descended with great speed, aiming to crush Izuku. However, just before it made contact, something strange happened. Error, error, target unreachable, error, the machine repeated as its mechanical arm froze in midair, just inches from the white-haired boy. Izuku smiled calmly, not moving from his spot. The robot was completely unable to reach him, its attempts to strike him rendered useless. Infinite, Izuku whispered with a confident grin. This, infinite, wasn't just any ordinary barrier. It was a technique Izuku had developed over years of refinement, replicating what he had done when that truck had nearly hit him. It consisted of creating a field of infinite deceleration around his body, an invisible barrier that manipulated the energy he could see with his eyes. This barrier caused anything trying to reach him to slow down until it almost completely stopped the closer it got. The robot, despite its strength and speed, simply couldn't touch him. It was trapped in a loop where every attempt to strike Izuku became futile. The infinite technique wasn't a simple defensive move, it required an immense amount of concentration. Izuku had learned that keeping the barrier active constantly drained a significant portion of his energy and mental capacity. However, by forming the specific hand sign he was using at that moment, he had managed to stabilize the energy flow, making the activation of infinite more efficient and freeing up much of his focus for other tasks. And now, he murmured, pulling his fist back slightly. With a swift motion, he thrust his fist forward, releasing a powerful burst of kinetic energy. PUMMTRSSS. The sound of metal being crushed echoed through the street as the robot's head disintegrated under the force of Izuku's punch. The remains of the robot scattered across the ground, and its metallic body collapsed heavily. Body reinforcement, he said to himself, smiling with satisfaction. This technique, called body reinforcement, was another skill he had honed over time. Instead of just surrounding his body with the energy he could see, Izuku had learned to concentrate it in specific areas, like his fists. By stabilizing the energy on one side of his body and leaving it unstable on the other, he could unleash massive force upon impact, multiplying the power of his strikes by at least 10 times, depending on the flow. It was a delicate balance, but very effective. I could try reinforcing my legs to run faster, but I don't have enough control yet. I can't risk losing mobility, he thought, casting one last glance at the destroyed robot. Determined to keep going, he turned down another street. This time, a larger robot lunged at him from the side, trying to take advantage of a potential blind spot. However, just as the robot was about to strike, it suddenly stopped dead in its tracks. Even with these glasses, I can clearly see in a 180-degree range. A surprise side attack won't work, Izuku said calmly, activating his infinite barrier once again. On the other side, a much larger robot was approaching. This one was a three-pointer, with a more durable structure and heavier weaponry. Unlike the others, its movements had a clear destructive intent. Perfect, Izuku murmured, extending his free hand toward the robot. Suddenly, the massive three-point robot began to lift off the ground. Izuku was using one of his most basic techniques, attraction, but on a much larger scale than when he first awakened his quirk. The robot flew rapidly toward him, accelerating at an impressive speed. However, just before it reached him, Izuku deactivated his infinite barrier and ducked, causing the three-point robot to violently collide with the previously stalled two-point robot. The impact was devastating, and both robots were completely destroyed. 5 more points. I'm up to 6 now, he told himself, continuing on his way at full speed. The attraction technique was simple in theory, but Izuku had reached an impressive level of mastery through constant training. By manipulating the invisible threads of energy he saw, Izuku could pull heavy objects with great precision and speed. Though he still didn't know the full extent of his power, he was already capable of attracting three-point robots without any noticeable effort. As he continued to move through the simulated city, he encountered 2 more robots, both worth 2 points. Without hesitation, he extended both hands, pulling them toward him at great speed. Timing it perfectly, he positioned himself right in the middle of them, and just as they passed by, he stretched his arms into a T shape, reinforcing his limbs. The 2 robots were deeply torn apart, destroyed by the power of his reinforcement technique. 10 points. He counted in his mind. With the same determination, Izuku kept moving through the exam area. Even though only 2 minutes had passed since the test began, he had already accumulated a respectable number of points. As he pressed forward, he destroyed 2 more one-point robots with reinforced punches, never stopping, always on the lookout for opportunities to score more points. As he kept running, Izuku noticed that other candidates, distracted and overwhelmed, were making costly mistakes. Although he wasn't obligated to help them, he couldn't stop himself when they were in danger. At one point, he saw a girl with black hair who wasn't paying attention and was about to be crushed by a three-point robot. Reacting quickly, Izuku extended his hand and pulled her toward him just in time, saving her from the danger. "Be careful, pay more attention to your surroundings," he said with a smile before launching himself at the robot and destroying it with 2 precise blows to the torso and 1 to the head. The girl, still in shock from what had just happened, didn't even have time to thank him, as Izuku was already on the move again, searching for his next target. The combination of attraction, reinforcement, and the use of his infinite technique was seamlessly integrated into his skill set, each ability applied with precise calculation. 35 points. 5 minutes left. I need to pick up the pace, he thought, diving into a narrow alleyway. To his surprise, the alley was a trap. 4 three-point robots surrounded him, and a 2-point robot blocked the only exit. All of the machines advanced at the same time, preparing for a coordinated attack. The sky above Izuku darkened as the metallic arms of the 5 robots descended on him, ready to crush him. In the observation room, several pro heroes were closely monitoring the progress of the exam. "What do you think of this year's applicants?" asked a chimera-like hero, watching the screens with interest. "There are some strong candidates in this generation. I think both classes will be quite impressive," replied a man. "That kid with the explosions already has 40 points. His mobility and reflexes are amazing," said a woman, pointing at one of the screens. "The pink-skinned girl, her acid is proving very effective against the robots," commented a slim, blonde man. "And you, Aizawa, what do you think?" the chimera asked, turning his attention to the hero known for his critical eye. "Camera 35, City F. Get ready to stop the robots. The white-haired kid just fell into an ambush," Aizawa responded in his usual bored tone. "Looks like he's in trouble. This might cost him points," the woman remarked with concern. "Don't be so sure," the chimera replied, a curious glint in his eyes. The 5 robots unleashed their combined attack on Izuku, but something strange happened. On the observation monitors, error messages began to flash. The robots were completely stalled around Izuku, unable to touch him. All of their attacks stopped just centimeters from his body, as if an invisible force was repelling them. Izuku smiled calmly, his hand forming the familiar gesture. "What's going on? Why are the robots malfunctioning? Is this his quirk?" asked a silver-haired man in the observation room. Izuku, still surrounded by the robots, smiled with an unusual intensity. "This is the perfect setup," he whispered, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "They can't touch me, and my infinite barrier doesn't hurt them, but if I do this..." His hair began to move violently, as if caught in a sudden gust of wind. Suddenly, the invisible barrier he had created began to expand. The distance between him and the robots grew, pushing the machines back against the alley walls. "If I increase the energy flow in my infinite, the field expands. The energy drain is higher, but if the robots crash into something, they'll start compressing, until they're destroyed," he murmured, smiling almost maniacally. The robots, trapped and unable to escape, were slowly crushed against the walls of the alley. Like being caught between 2 massive forces, the 5 robots were destroyed within seconds, their metallic bodies twisting and crumpling until they were nothing but wreckage. 14 more points, Izuku said to himself with satisfaction. He now had a total of 49 points. In the observation room, the heroes watched in astonishment. He crushed them. Telekinesis or some kind of barrier. "What kind of quirk is this?" Aizawa asked, a mix of confusion and interest in his voice. "His name is Izuku Midoriya. Quirk. Limitless," the chimera hero replied, smiling. "Limitless? What kind of power is that?" the blonde man asked, intrigued. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Izuku kept moving, looking for more robots. He was determined to keep racking up points, even though he was starting to feel the mental fatigue from keeping his quirk active for so long. The exhaustion was undeniable, but there was something else, a strange sense of euphoria that drove him to push beyond his limits. Feeling particularly bold, he reinforced his legs for the first time and made an impressive leap, soaring 4 meters into the air. "Yahoo!" he yelled, enjoying the sensation of flying. From the heights, he activated his quirk and pulled 3 robots toward him, 2 2-pointers and 1 3-pointer. The machines were lifted off the ground as if they were toys, speeding toward him with impressive velocity. Just before they reached him, Izuku deactivated the attraction and began to descend. However, the robots, propelled by the momentum of the attraction, continued their trajectory, violently colliding with each other just above him. Other candidates passing by the area looked on in shock at the chaos Izuku had unleashed from the sky. As he fell, the debris from the destroyed robots seemed to follow him, but Izuku, making his hand gesture once again, activated his infinite barrier. His fall slowed to a near halt, hovering just a few centimeters above the ground. The shattered remnants of the robots piled up above him, though in reality, they never touched him as his barrier kept them at bay. With one last surge of energy, he expanded the barrier, clearing the heap of metal from his path. 7 more points. That puts me at 56 inches, he calculated mentally, breathing heavily but with a euphoric smile on his face. Present Mike's voice echoed across the exam field. Only 3 minutes left. Izuku, aware of his growing mental fatigue, felt that he could still keep going. His mind was tired, but the excitement pushed him to go further. I can keep going. More. I can push even further, he thought with a mix of determination and adrenaline as he hurled himself back into action. Izuku extended his right hand, focusing, and his eyes gleamed intensely behind his dark glasses as 3 one-point robots aligned in front of him. Energy flowed through his body, invisible to everyone else, but to him, it was palpable. With controlled precision, the metallic robots were pulled toward him in a perfectly straight line. The force guiding them seemed to tug at every bolt and screw, drawing them inevitably closer to Izuku. As the robots sped toward him, Izuku took a deep breath, calculating the precise moment. With a simple flick of his free hand, energy surged through his body, reinforcing his right arm. His dark glasses slid slightly down his face, slick with sweat, but that didn't stop him. The impact was immense. His reinforced fist smashed through all 3 robots in a single blow as if they were made of paper. The metal bodies of the robots shattered, sending sparks and debris skidding across the ground, rolling to a stop, lifeless like discarded toys. Izuku didn't even pause to look at the destruction. Suddenly, he sensed a threatening presence behind him. A 3-point robot was approaching, ready to strike him from behind. Without turning, Izuku reacted instantly, connecting with his surroundings. His eyes caught sight of a large chunk of rubble in front of him, part of a collapsed building. He activated his attraction quirk once again. With a fluid motion, the rubble lifted off the ground, floating with invisible power. The piece of debris shot backward with incredible speed, like a projectile. He ducked just at the right moment, letting the rubble fly past him, feeling the rush of air as it whizzed by. The rubble hurtled straight into the 3-point robot, which had no chance to react. Crash! The impact was beep. The weight of the debris crushed the 3-pointer, causing it to collapse under its own mass. The remnants of the robot scattered across the ground, and the street was silent for a brief moment. Izuku couldn't help but let out a wild laugh, adrenaline pumping through his veins. Ha 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 ha! His voice echoing through the simulated city, fueled by the thrill of the battle. Suddenly, a deafening sound cut through the air. Izuku's laughter stopped abruptly. Something enormous was shaking the ground beneath his feet. He quickly turned his head to the right and saw it, the massive 0-point robot. But this wasn't just big, it was colossal. Izuku's eyes widened in shock as he took in the monstrous size of the machine. The giant metal behemoth advanced with steps that seemed to make the entire simulated city tremble. Its shadow darkened the streets, and the buildings around it vibrated from its sheer presence. Each step it took sent a quake through the ground, as if an invisible earthquake was tearing through the area. What the? Izuku muttered, his words drowned out by the mechanical roar of the beast. The screams of other applicants began to fill the air, mixing with the rumble of the robot. Run! It's the 0-pointer. What is UA thinking? Look at the size of that thing. Panic spread like wildfire among the examinees as they started running in all directions, fleeing from the towering robot. Izuku felt the impulse to run with them, knowing that fighting something so massive was madness. His mental fatigue was catching up with him, his brain screaming for rest. But just as he was about to step back, he heard something that made him freeze in place. Help! A female voice cried out from the distance. Izuku quickly scanned the area, searching for the source of the scream. At the end of the street, a girl with brown hair was trapped under a huge piece of debris. Her face was filled with desperation as she tried, in vain, to free her leg, which was completely pinned down. I can't move, she shouted, her voice cracking as she struggled to hold back tears. A little farther away from the robot, another examinee was trapped between the claws of a 2-point robot. Though damaged, the robot refused to let go. Damn it, why can't I break free? He yelled, frantically fighting against the robot's grip. Someone help. This girl passed out, cried a third candidate, holding an unconscious girl in his arms. Izuku looked around, seeing how the other applicants continued running, ignoring the desperate pleas for help. No one stopped. No one looked back. They were all blinded by the fear of the massive zero-pointer. Izuku's mind started racing in 1,000 directions. 3 people were in danger. The giant robot was closing in. And he was alone. No, I can't save all of them, he thought, a wave of helplessness washing over him. The mental exhaustion hit him like a tidal wave. He couldn't think clearly. He couldn't pull all 3 of them to safety without risking injury. His control wasn't precise enough to handle something that delicate in his current state. He would have to choose. Save one, and leave the others behind. His breathing quickened. The cries of the examinees echoed in his mind like endless reverberations. His body began to tremble from the tension and stress. A nervous smile spread across his face. Save just one. What the hell is wrong with me? He thought as a spark of determination ignited inside him. No. I can't do that. I'm going to save all of them. With that resolution set in his mind, the fear vanished. Izuku charged toward the massive zero-point robot, knowing there wasn't a second to waste. His legs burned from the effort, and every step felt heavier than the last, but he couldn't stop. He had one final technique in mind. It was something he had theorized but never had the chance to test. Now, it was his only option. I've never tried this before, but if it works, I'll stop the robot, he thought, his determination unwavering. As he sprinted toward the girl trapped under the rubble, Izuku removed his dark glasses. His eyes, now fully exposed, glowed with an intense blue light. The energy within him began to swirl, responding to the call of his will. With his glasses off, the flow of energy became clearer, more precise. The threads of energy that only he could see started vibrating and intertwining around him. I can see all of them. They're outside the robot's range if I bring it down with the exception of the brown-haired girl, he thought, racing forward. His unobstructed vision allowed him to see everything around him, capturing every detail of the battlefield. Izuku extended his right arm, while his left hand gripped it tightly to stabilize the flow of energy that was rapidly building up. The theoretical idea behind what he was about to do was to combine infinite with his attraction force and his manipulation of volatile energy. He had never attempted it before, but now, he had no choice. If I create a focus of energy similar to infinite, but make it mobile, I can launch it. I'll push the attraction to its maximum and have it collide with the volatile energy. It'll warp space and compress everything in its path, he murmured, concentrating as a small point of energy began to form in his outstretched palm. His bright blue eyes, glowing with a superhuman intensity, tracked the threads of energy, stabilizing each one. The energy swirled in his hand, spinning faster, gathering into a bright point that grew larger with every second. Focus, Izuku. See the flow. Stabilize the threads, accelerate the rotation. Push it to the limit, he thought as the tiny point in his palm turned into a luminous sphere, growing in size with each passing moment. The sphere started to glow, no longer invisible but now radiating an unusual color he had never seen before in his energy. Ha! Ha ha! I never thought it would take on this color. But now it's time to see if it does what I think, he said with a tense smile as he positioned himself between the girl with brown hair and the massive robot, shielding her with his body. Blood began to drip from his nose from the strain, but Izuku didn't stop. The zero-pointer was about to attack. With strange calmness, Izuku raised the sphere of energy above his head and hurled it with all his strength at the robot. Improvised technique. Infinite energy rotation. Blue. The sphere shot forward in a straight line, heading directly for the massive torso of the zero-point robot. The sphere collided, and what followed was pure destruction. The giant robot began to fold in on itself, twisting and contorting as the sphere seemed to warp the space around its metal structure. The metal shrieked horribly, being compressed into unnatural shapes. The sound was deafening, like the agonized scream of the machine itself. Izuku, still standing with his arm outstretched, continued to pour energy into his attack. The top half of the robot was obliterated, crushed into a superheated mass of metal that started collapsing toward the ground, dangerously close to Izuku and the girl. With the last of his energy, Izuku made his hand gesture and activated his infinite barrier at full power, creating a shield around them just in time. The compressed metal stopped mere centimeters from his barrier, saving them from being crushed. The air was silent for a brief moment. "The exam is over," President Mike's voice echoed across the exam field. The other candidates, who had been running in fear, began to approach, shocked at what had just happened. Some rushed to help the others who had called for aid, but everyone was in awe of what they had witnessed. As the dust settled, it revealed Izuku standing, blood dripping from his nose and his blue hoodie stained with red. His legs trembled, but a tired smile crept across his face. He looked at the girl he had just saved. "Ha, ha, are you all right?" he asked with a weak smile, breathing heavily. The girl, still in shock, could barely find her voice. "Me, you're the one who's bleeding. Are you okay?" she asked, concerned. Izuku let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head slightly. "I'm just glad you're all right. Everyone's safe," he murmured before his body, finally exhausted, gave in. He collapsed, unconscious, into the girl's arms, who managed to catch him just in time. In the observation room, the pro-heroes who had been monitoring the exam were left speechless. "What the hell was that blue sphere?" asked the blonde man, unable to take his eyes off the screen. "I don't know, but did you see how he took down the zero-pointer?" remarked the silver-haired man, equally amazed. "It looks like he hurt himself with that attack, maybe a last-ditch effort." A woman commented, a mix of curiosity and concern in her voice. The Chimera hero smiled as he observed the monitors. "I've already sent Recovery Girl to that zone. Got anything to say, Aizawa?" he asked with a smug grin. Aizawa watched the screen in silence for a long moment before letting out a sigh. "Trouble. That kid's going to give me a lot of trouble," he said in a resigned tone, though a barely perceptible smile crossed his face. A few days later, Izuku sat at his desk, staring blankly at the wall. It had been exactly a week since he'd taken the entrance exam for UA High School, and every day since had been an emotional roller coaster. Outwardly, his face showed a neutral, almost cold calmness, as if the suspense didn't bother him. But inside, he was being consumed by nerves, as if a whirlwind of anxiety was constantly keeping him on edge. The technique he had used at the end of the exam combining, Infinite, with his attraction force had obliterated the massive zero-pointer in a way that no one had expected. After his quick recovery thanks to Recovery Girl's quirk, Izuku hadn't been able to stop worrying if he had broken any rules. Technically, President Mike had only recommended avoiding the zero-pointer, but he hadn't said it was forbidden to destroy it. Still, that didn't bring him much comfort. Izuku knew that getting into UA was his only realistic ticket to becoming a hero. The academy not only offered access to experienced teachers and professional heroes but also provided the best hero suits from top companies, state-of-the-art laboratories, and most importantly, facilities where he could train his quirk at its fullest capacity. There, he could train without limits, under the supervision of professionals who would guide and mentor him. He had to get in. Failure wasn't an option. The hours dragged on endlessly. His fingers drummed on the desk, his legs shook nervously under the table, and his mind kept replaying every moment of the exam, over and over again. Knock knock knock. The knocks on the door snapped him out of his trance. His heart skipped a beat. Izuku stood up slowly, his expression still composed, and opened the door to his room. Standing there was his mother, Izuku Midoriya, trembling with her eyes full of uncertainty. Izuku, it's here, the letter is here," she said in a shaky voice, holding out a white envelope. Her hands were shaking so much that she could barely hold it. Izuku looked at her, trying to keep his face calm. He took the envelope without saying a word and closed the door behind him. He stood there in silence for a moment, staring at the envelope in his hands. His eyes locked onto it, as if it were an object of immense power. Everything he had ever dreamed of since he was a child depended on this single piece of paper. His future, his goals, his dreams, everything was inside that envelope. Taking a deep breath, he carefully opened it, almost afraid of what he would find inside. The first thing he saw was a letter, but what really caught his attention was a small electronic device that gently fell onto his desk. As soon as he touched it, the device lit up and projected a hologram that illuminated the room. Izuku's eyes widened in disbelief. It was All Might. What? He whispered, unable to believe what he was seeing. All Might's holographic figure appeared, wearing his signature wide grin full of energy. I am here, All Might exclaimed in his booming voice, making his usual grand entrance. Izuku stood frozen, his eyes locked on the image of the greatest hero of all time. Why was All Might talking to him? What could this possibly mean? Young Midoriya, let me inform you that you aced the written exam with an almost perfect score of 97 points. Impressive, All Might continued, his vibrant tone filling the room, and in the practical exam, your score was 68 points. Izuku's body tensed. He immediately stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. Did he make it? Did he score enough points to get in? But that's not all, All Might said, interrupting his thoughts. The exams are not just about physical and written tests. A team of professional heroes monitors every moment, ready to step in if things get out of control. At no point were you in any real danger. Hearing those words, Izuku felt a pang in his chest. For a moment, he felt a bit foolish. Of course, there was never any real danger. How had he not thought of that? The exams were designed to be safe. You're probably thinking you didn't need to face that 0-pointer, right? All Might continued with a smile, but you're wrong, young Midoriya. Besides evaluating combat skills, we also assess heroic acts. A hero academy could never overlook the importance of saving others. And that's why there are rescue points. Izuku's breath quickened again. Rescue points. Young Midoriya, you didn't face that colossus to save yourself or to show off. You threw yourself into danger to save your fellow applicants. During the exam, you helped others on more than one occasion, demonstrating the true spirit of a hero. And for that, you are awarded 78 rescue points. Izuku Midoriya, your total score is 146 points. You passed. All Might finished his statement, striking an exaggerated pose and flexing his muscles. Izuku could hardly believe what he was hearing. 146 points. A mix of emotions hit him all at once. Relief, euphoria, the exhaustion of days of anxiety, all of it released in a rush. Tears welled up in his eyes and streamed down his cheeks. The emotions he had held back for so long finally overflowed, making his body shake. Come to your academy, young man. Let's make you a great hero. All Might concluded with his signature confident smile just before the projection faded. Izuku stood frozen in the middle of his room, tears still flowing freely down his face. He didn't try to stop them. He cried hard, but it wasn't from sadness. They were tears of joy, of relief. He had finally done it. He had finally crossed the starting line. He was one step closer to achieving his dream. He was going to be a hero. On the other side of the door, Izuku Midoriya had been listening to everything. Her hands covered her mouth, trying to stifle her own sobs as tears streamed from her eyes. Her heart pounded as she heard the news she had so desperately hoped for. "Oh, my baby, you did it," she whispered through her tears, her voice trembling. With her heart swelling with pride but still hurt by the distance between her and her son, Izuku quietly withdrew to her room, leaving Izuku alone to savor the momentum moment that would change his life forever. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.